to Shuck with the Great Northern Corridor Coalition.
All right. Well, let's start off by giving you a little micro commercial, if you will. Tell us a little bit about the organization that you're the director for there.
So the Great Northern Corridor Coalition is a nonprofit 501c3 educational foundation, and essentially we represent 8 states, about 15 public ports, 162 counties from Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. So essentially, the Highline, or what used to be the footprint of the Great Northern Railway.
Is Joliet still a big player in the rail world these days?
Joliet?
Yeah, Illinois.
Yeah, not as much. Interesting in this part of the country currently, the interchange or the exchange point for the Montana Rail Link and BNSF happens at Laurel, Montana, and so there's a lot going on there. You know what I mean? A lot going on in Laurel on what used to be the Northern Pacific route, that ran on the southern, through Bismarck and obviously started, in the Fargo area and rolled through, the southern portion of Montana. Now BNSF shares its rights or supports the Montana Rail Link, which actually has a lease over that old line. But there's a lot of activity here, and as we're looking at traffic out of North Dakota particularly, the nice thing is you got a couple of options, or the railroad has a couple of options in terms of routing, which really helps for, capacity and velocity decisions that the railroad makes as far as getting products to market.
I'm showing my age a little bit. You mentioned Illinois, and right away I was thinking about an interview I had with some guys that were figuring out gas stations, and they started with Joliet, Illinois, because that was a major fleet trucking exchange, not the rail. And so, sorry about that. I'm showing my age. I'm getting a little bit confused, and my wires aren't crossing as good as they used to. But Laurel, Montana. Okay. Are there any other of those exchanges along the way? I mean, you mentioned 8 states, and so is there? How does that work? I guess if you guys are overseeing it, is there? Talk to me a little bit about that 8-state part with the different crossover. You mentioned Laurel, Montana. Are there any other ones along the way?
Oh gosh, yes. There's many interchange points. So what our primary mission is to help to create, this public-private partnership and really focus funding on certain projects that benefit the entire corridor. And as you mentioned, 8 states and 162 counties, that can be dicey in terms of trying to get everybody on the same page as far as, a list of priority projects and then the discussion about how we're going to approach funding. This year we've got 8 projects that we're supporting, that the coalition is supporting from Washington across the entire corridor. 2 of them actually are in North Dakota that we're working with the North Dakota Department of Transportation on. And, so it's an exciting opportunity to really bring a focus on to, a corridor-wide investment from the federal transportation funding program, as well as managing our private partners. Obviously, BNSF Railway is a big partner for the coalition, but so are each of the states. And I think specific to North Dakota, the North Dakota Department of Transportation has been key. One of our executive board members now is Commissioner Doug Goring with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. So we're starting to see agriculture have a larger, more defined seat at the table. And as you remember, Jason, a couple of years ago when crude by rail was really at its peak, that interface between agriculture and energy really became good times because, the farmers felt that the oil trains were taking precedent and the oil shippers felt like the ag trains were taking precedent. Well, now this organization hopefully will help to, number one, continue to support funding for projects, but also, have a way for a forum for folks to work together from these different industry groups. And it's been super successful, and I'm excited to be able to be.
How is the ag crude balance out there? I wanted to ask you about the different exchange stations. I want to get back to that, more of an indicator in terms of if you're seeing any sort of like fracking sand or lumber, any sort of economic indicators you might see being on and off the rail, because to me, the railroad is the backbone of the economy. And so you take a look at what's being shipped to the rail, and you can prepare yourself for a year or two, that sort of thing. It trickles down is what I'm getting. It ripples out through the rest of the economy. But let's start with that crude and ag relationship. You're right. There was a little bit of a strained relationship there. And now that, honestly, and I never even thought of this till right now, even back then, we were putting out 1 million plus barrels a day, and we're still putting out 1 million plus barrels a day. So I know BNSF made some major investments, and they got some new rail cars and that sort of thing. But are we having any more of those choke points, or they seem to be kind of satisfying both the oilmen and the farmers?
Well, so a couple of things to your point. BNSF had invested a significant amount of money, not only in equipment, tank cars, but also in the physical infrastructure. So, the railroad itself, the track bed, new track, new double track in places, new bridges, to the tune of nearly $4 billion. And we're really seeing the benefit of that now by, the manifestation is reduction in congestion. Also some of the other infrastructure that's been put in place, things like the Dakota Access Pipeline and other pipeline capacity that's come online, has also started to ease some of that burden on the rail transportation side. And, of course, the whole market dip put a big dent in that as well. And so now, interestingly enough, the balance is really good. Agriculture is still super strong. Is the leading commodity on the Highline right now. The amount of product that's moving across the network is pretty significant, along with consumer goods. So a lot of the containerized freight that you see moving across the country right now. And that comes in two fashions. That's both domestic intermodal and international intermodal. And that's super strong, very, very busy in this lane as well. Automotives are still very strong. A lot of trade with the Pacific Rim. And, of course, that's both inbound and outbound. It's pretty neat to be able to go to the ports of the Pacific Northwest and watch us exporting Chryslers and Chevrolets to Asia and different parts of the world, while we're importing Toyotas and Hondas and some of these other nameplates. So there's a good trade balance happening there. Certainly, you mentioned lumber and forest products. With some of the storm events that we've seen here, especially over the last 12 months, has really driven an uptick in the amount of forest products that are moving from the Pacific Northwest into Chicago. And then, of course, from Chicago, that's the primary interchange point now for BNSF Railway to be able to connect up with the eastern railroads, with the Norfolk Southern and the CSX. So that's where, again, a lot of the traffic that we see going by, as we're in Tioga or Williston or Grand Forks is mostly headed for that interchange in Chicago. So, today, as of earlier this week, we're running about 40 plus trains a day across the Highline. It's about 40 to 45 is about capacity. good volume. That's still real steady volume.
How about on the import side? You mentioned kind of some consumer goods and ag was grains, if you will, seem to be kind of the exporting out and even domestically. But how about on the import side? You mentioned cars, but anything else? I imagine consumer goods are pretty big, but are you seeing any big trends there in terms of what we're taking in from other countries?
We're starting to see, more balance on some of the steel side, some of the dimensional and tubular steel. So much of that has been in the past and still is tied to our international trade relations and the various and sundry tariffs that get placed on those specific commodities. The majority, though, of the traffic that we see from a railroad perspective is really in the containerized consumer goods, and that's, anything, any numbers of products that are shipping, and most of that actually comes in through the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, which is now the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and ends up going to Chicago for distribution, either in the heartland or for moving further to the East Coast. And so, interestingly enough, for us here in the Midwest, North Dakota particularly, those trains just kind of roll on by, and for our shippers in North Dakota who are interested in taking advantage of some of those, intermodal economics, they find themselves having to go to hubs in Chicago, sometimes Minneapolis, St. Paul, but mostly Chicago, to be able to take advantage of that. So we're trying to work on maintaining North Dakota's competitiveness on the global stage and always looking at new opportunities to lever, rail transportation and make it more, number one, efficient, and then number two, cost effective.
Curtis Shuck on the line with us here. We're talking a little bit about, I guess rail transportation would be the way to describe it. Curtis is with the Great Northern Corridor Coalition, and just a few more questions left here. I wanted to ask you about those exchanges again, and the last question I had on those was, I know some other people were looking at building, areas close to the rail because of the environmental solutions and just kind of that new safety and environmental wave that was coming to light. And there was a lot of new requirements and regulations that came in with chemicals being shipped and different products being shipped on the rail. So is any of that construction coming to fruition? I haven't really followed up in the last few years on that, but was there a lot of investment being done in those areas where the rail, comes and where people are doing the newer chemicals, if you will?
Yeah, we're definitely, especially now with the rebounding crude oil price, we're starting to see more facility investment. A lot of that was put on hold, in 2014, 15, and 16 with, like I said, with the downturn and crude pricing. But, the one thing that's interesting, Jason, and I think was exciting during that time period is it really did drive a focus on efficiency and a focus on partnerships. We saw that a lot specifically in the Williston Basin. And now that the price is rebounding and there's an uptick in activity levels in the Bakken in particular on oil and gas, one of the things that we're seeing, and you mentioned those interface points, and those are really critical. The terminals that we've got in North Dakota are super strategic. And, one of the things that the Great Northern Corridor Coalition focuses on is the fact that we are a multimodal organization. We know that, there's a first mile and a last mile for every little bit of freight that moves. And so while rail transportation is an important component of that, really we can't solve the puzzle if we don't have solid clarification, both of those are highway projects. So the first project we're supporting is the replacement of the Long X Bridge on Highway 85, which is, obviously a critical north-south connector. But the second project is the improvements to Highway 1804 east of Williston to Newtown. And I think that, from a corridor-wide perspective, one of the things that we focus on is making sure that freight, whether it's energy freight or agricultural freight or, consumer goods freight, has the ability to move. Now, along with that, is also the development of some new terminals and the repurposing of some of the old terminals. There's a lot of infrastructure that's in place in North Dakota today. Many of the crude loops or the crude facilities that really help to pioneer the industry are looking at sort of repurposing themselves right now. And we've got an opportunity to be working with several of them. And part of what we do is consult on, relationships with the railroad or consult on new business opportunities, and then also making connections with our global contacts, our port partners in the Pacific Coast, our business partners in the Chicago and Minnesota area. So it's an exciting time. It's really exciting for North Dakota right now as we're kind of reinventing ourselves here.
Well, that seems to be the common theme, reinvention. And, when you're talking about those interchanges, all I can think of is those old grain elevators, how they look so weathered and everything. And it works for grain, I get it, but so much advancement is done in so many different areas. So I was glad to hear that a lot of investment has been going into those interchange modals, but then also that you guys are keeping an eye on the highway because, as I mentioned earlier, the railroad is the backbone of the economy. Well, then the truckers play a big part of it too, as the nerves and the bones, if you will. But you need that backbone, which the rail does, and then from there the trucks. So you're right to say we got to pay attention to these highways too. Is that pretty much discussed all the time? How the different parts of the economic ripple that the rail really does, I guess, represent and support?
Absolutely, and everybody is looking for the fastest route to market and the cheapest route to market. Every one of those discussions includes truckers or the need to move freight by truck. Interestingly enough, it also includes the community discussions as well. We all operate with a social license. And we all have the requirement to be good actors and good operators. And so, as we're supporting new projects coming along in terms of terminal development, one of the things that we're really focused on is helping them with their community relations as well. And that's why a lot of my job is getting the word out about the Great Northern Corridor Coalition, and the fact that we're a connected network, if you would, or an Internet of Things, and that really becomes important, Jason, like on the West Coast, where some of the environmental regulations and some of the community perspectives and politics are certainly nothing like we face every day in North Dakota. And just that understanding of how important it is for all of us to see this as a national asset, and again, and our railroads are only going to be as successful as our port facilities are on the West Coast, especially as we're trading with Asia. So, we're hoping to continue to improve those relationships between the states and between the shippers and the growers or the producers. So that's another really important part of our mission right now.
Any final thoughts you might have? Anything we left out? Anything you want to reiterate along those lines? Of course, this is Curtis Shuck. He's the executive director with the Great Northern Corridor. And the floor is yours for any final thoughts you might have, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say to everyone that, the Great Northern Corridor Coalition has selected Williston, North Dakota as its home base. We represent over 38 million Americans and 162 counties, and we're really proud to be able, like I said, to call Williston and North Dakota our home. And so appreciate the support, Jason, from you and the Crude Life team, and we look forward to staying in touch and keeping you guys up to date.